The capture January 25, 1943, near Fade Pass, Tunisia. The desert wind carried the faint scent of oil and gunpowder. Panzer Grenadier Karl Hoffmann pressed his back against a burning half-track, his rifle useless, its barrel jammed with sand. Around him, the shattered remnants of the Afrika Korps lay scattered, broken armor, black smoke, and cries of men who had once believed themselves invincible under Rommel's command. He peeked over the wreckage and froze. A column of olive-drab Shermans advanced steadily across the dunes. Behind them came trucks bearing the White Star, American insignia. His heart pounded. Americana? He had heard stories from Nazi propaganda that Americans were crude, violent, half-civilized factory workers with no discipline. Captivity under them, the pamphlet said, was a fate worse than death. But when the American patrol reached him, the scene didn't fit the story. A young GI in a dusty helmet raised his M1 rifle but didn't fire. "Hands up, buddy," the soldier shouted. "It's over." Hoffmann hesitated, then dropped his weapon. Within minutes, he and dozens of others were rounded up, searched, and handed canteens of water. One soldier even offered him a Lucky Strike cigarette dot as the sun set over the Tunisian dunes. Hoffmann sat in the back of a truck, wrists loosely bound, cigarette smoke curling upward. He whispered to the man beside him, a mechanic from Stuttgart, "If this is how the barbarians treat prisoners, what else have we been lied about?" The convoy rumbled toward a distant port, and for many, toward the heart of America. The journey across the ocean, April 3, 1943, Atlantic Ocean. Aboard the S.S. Joseph Wheeler, the hold smelled of salt, diesel, and fear. Hundreds of German prisoners were crammed into the converted cargo bay, their boots echoing against the steel floor as the ship rolled with the waves. Above deck, U.S. Navy guards scanned the horizon, alert for U-boats, the irony not lost on the captured submariners below. Karl Hoffmann sat on a wooden bench, clutching a dented tin cup of coffee. It was warm, actually warm, and sweetened with sugar. A month earlier he'd been scavenging for food scraps in Tunisia. Now, aboard an American transport, he was being served coffee twice a day. He turned to an older officer beside him, Oberfeldwebel Weber, and whispered, "They feed us better than we fed our own laborers." Weber gave a humorless chuckle. Propaganda never mentioned this part. Days stretched into weeks. The prisoners played cards, shared songs, and waited. Some feared they'd be sent to Alcatraz or forced into mines. Others hoped they'd at least avoid the Eastern Front. Then, one morning, a sailor opened the hatch and shouted down, "Welcome to America, boys." Through the crack of sunlight, Karl saw land, sprawling docks, cranes, and endless lines of cargo ships stretching along the horizon. It wasn't the burned-out Europe he knew. It was a machine, a country alive with motion, steel, and purpose. The scale was overwhelming. Warehouses stacked to the sky, trains groaning with supplies, civilians driving trucks, welding ships, working without pause. Germany had told them America was soft, lazy, decadent. But here, the truth gleamed like the rivets of a Liberty ship. As the prisoners disembarked in New York Harbor, Karl whispered, almost to himself, "We never stood a chance." Life behind the fence, May 1943, Camp Hearn, Texas. The air was hot, thick with dust and the hum of cicadas. Rows of barracks stretched across the Texas prairie, each fenced with barbed wire and guarded by wooden towers. To Karl Hoffmann's surprise, there were no screams, no dogs, no beatings. Instead, an American sergeant with a clipboard walked down the line, reading names. "Prisoner 1087, Hoffmann Karl." Karl stepped forward. "Welcome to Camp Hearn," the sergeant said flatly. "You'll get your bed, your chow, and your work assignment tomorrow. No trouble, no problems. Understand?" Karl nodded, waiting for the sneer or shove that never came. Inside the barracks, the walls were clean, the floors swept. Each prisoner had a bunk with a mattress, 2 blankets, and even a pillow. In the mess hall, the smell hit him first. Beef stew. Beef. He sat across from Weber, spoon trembling in his hand. The food wasn't just edible. It was rich, hot, and heavy with flavor. Then came something almost unreal. After dinner, Red Cross parcels were distributed. Inside each box were items he hadn't seen in months: chocolate, soap, writing paper, and most shocking of all, a pack of Lucky Strikes. A few men laughed nervously, unsure if this was some trick. "This can't be real," one muttered in disbelief. Weber tapped the table with his spoon. "It's real. They're feeding us like kings." At dusk, the guards switched on the floodlights, but their tone remained almost casual. Some even chatted with prisoners about baseball or swing music through the fence. Karl didn't understand the words, but he caught the tone: light, easy, unafraid. He leaned back against the wall that night, staring through the small window toward the open sky. "This country," he whispered, "they fight like machines. But they treat prisoners like men." Outside, a radio played softly from the guard post. Glenn Miller's In the Mood, and Somewhere in Texas. German prisoners slept with full stomachs for the first time in years. The Realization, summer 1944, Camp Hearn, Texas. By the middle of 1944, life in the camp had settled into rhythm. The POWs woke at dawn, lined up for roll call, and marched to breakfast: eggs, bacon, toast, even coffee refills. Afterward, they worked on nearby farms or helped maintain military supply depots under guard supervision. Karl, now assigned to a cotton field outside the camp, watched the farmers' tractors crawl across the horizon. Massive steel machines plowing fields faster than an entire German company could dig trenches. Rows of new equipment gleamed under the Texas sun: John Deere, International Harvester, Fordson. He couldn't help but whisper to Weber, "Even their farmers have more machinery than the Wehrmacht." The older man nodded grimly. "Now I understand how they build so many tanks and planes." In the evenings, when the day's work was done, the Americans gave them recreation time. Some prisoners played soccer, others built miniature gardens. A few attended English classes run by the YMCA. The guards even allowed a makeshift theater, POWs sewing costumes out of burlap sacks to perform Hamlet and Faust in German. It was absurd, unthinkable, and yet it was real. Letters from home painted a grim contrast. Germany was starving. Cities bombed to rubble. Families rationed everything. Yet here, in enemy hands, they had food, music, and safety. One night, Karl sat by the fence with a guard named Joe Miller, a tall man from Kansas who offered him a cigarette. "You smoke?" Joe asked. Karl nodded. "Yeah." "Danke," the guard chuckled. "You know, you boys are lucky. My cousin's in France fighting your buddies right now." Karl exhaled slowly, the ember glowing between his fingers. "Then why treat us so well?" Joe shrugged. "Orders. Geneva rules. You stop fightin', you're just people again." That sentence lingered like the smoke between them. You're just people again. Weeks later, a new shipment of POWs arrived from France. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, half-starved. They had been captured by the Soviets and exchanged through Turkey. When they saw the American camp, the clean uniforms, full meals, and laughter, some of them wept openly. For Karl and his comrades, the illusion was gone. The Reich had told them America was a land of chaos and corruption. But behind the barbed wire, they had seen its truth: discipline, abundance, and a strange mercy that felt almost alien. He began to write in his journal, "We came as enemies. But here, behind fences, we've seen the future. Germany fights with pride. America fights with power and kindness. And that is why they will win." Outside, the camp loudspeaker played swing music again, a sound both foreign and familiar now. The war raged on thousands of miles away, But for the men inside the wire, the battle for belief had already been lost. The end of the war and the awakening May 8, 1945, victory in Europe. Day. The Texas sky was cloudless when the news arrived. Guards gathered around a small radio in the administration hut, their faces split between relief and disbelief. The war, der Krieg, was over. Hitler was dead. Germany had surrendered. Inside the barracks, the announcement spread like fire. Some prisoners cheered quietly. Others stared blankly at the floor. A few wept, not for the Führer, but for the home that no longer existed. Karl Hoffmann sat at his desk, a cheap American pencil in hand, staring at the empty page of his journal. For 2 years he'd lived behind American wire, fed, clothed, and treated not as a beast, but as a man. Now he realized the world he was taught to die for had been built on lies. Outside, the American guards didn't gloat. Instead, they opened the camp gates and played music, "Don't Fence Me In." POWs were allowed to write letters again. Red Cross representatives arrived with pamphlets on rebuilding Germany, democracy, and human rights. It felt unreal, even humiliating, yet strangely hopeful. That afternoon, Karl and Weber were assigned to help unload a supply truck. When the tailgate opened, Karl froze. Inside were crates marked for Europe, food relief, flour, sugar, canned meat, aid for Germans. The same nation that had bombed London, sunk Allied ships, and slaughtered millions. He turned to the driver, a sergeant from Ohio. This is going to Germany?" The man nodded. "Yep, you'll see. When you go home, it'll be waiting for you." Karl couldn't speak. His throat tightened. That night, he wrote one final entry in his journal. "We lost the war long before Berlin fell. We lost it when we believed cruelty made us strong. The Americans showed us that strength can feed its enemies and still sleep at night." Weeks later, transport trains arrived. Prisoners were processed, fingerprinted, and handed discharge papers stamped "Released U.S. Army, 1945. As the train pulled away from Camp Hearn, Karl pressed his forehead against the window. He watched the barracks recede, the place where he'd eaten steak for the first time in years, where kindness had felt like a weapon sharper than any rifle. The last thing he saw was a guard, raising 2 fingers in farewell. Peace, not victory, for Karl and thousands like him. Captivity in America had rewritten everything they thought they knew about war, about honor, about humanity. When he stepped off the ship back in Bremen, he carried no flag, no weapon, only a worn notebook filled with questions, and a single unopened pack of Lucky Strikes. He never smoked that last pack. He kept it, for the rest of his life, as proof that mercy can be stronger than hate.